The wind hadn't let up in 4 days, and by the 5th, the cold moved like a slow bullet through wood, cloth, and bone. They said Willard's heater was trash, just a drum full of holes, but when the coal ran out and the pipes froze, it was the only thing between his daughters and the grave. Before we stoke this fire, let us know where you're watching from, and if these stories stir something in you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's tale might carry warmth where today's ran cold. They said a lot about Willard Hayes in the fall of '33, most of it behind his back, some of it loud enough for his daughters to hear. He'd been a mechanic before the plant closed, before the bank took the Ford, before the dust turned his lungs gritty, and his wife's silence brittle. By October, he was a man of calloused hands and no paycheck, digging through alleys for scrap while his girls warmed soup with more water than flavor. He found the barrel near the back of McKinley's wreck yard, rusted through in spots, dented on both sides, and slick with black residue. It wasn't even a proper oil drum, just some industrial cast-off with jagged edges and mystery stains. But he stared at it like a man staring down a wolf and seeing dinner instead of teeth. He dragged it 2 miles home on a broken cart, one wheel squealing the whole way. His eldest, Ruthie, asked if it was for burning trash. For burning cold, he said, and that was the end of it. Their shack wasn't much tar paper nailed over frame, one room, one door that didn't quite close. Nights were growing sharper, and Willard knew they wouldn't afford coal come December. The government relief hadn't arrived, and folks in town were already trading potatoes for old shoes. Heat was about to become currency. So he got to work. Punched holes into the drum's sides with a railroad spike. Cut a circular vent into the top, then fit it with a pipe made of coffee cans, crimped and wired together. Stuck a baking rack inside to hold kindling above the ash bed. He called it a heater. The neighbors called it dangerous. Mrs. Appleton from next door said he'd smoke his girls to death. Even Sheriff Merrick passed by and muttered something about house fires and foolish pride. Willard said nothing, just kept working, sharpening the air holes, laying bricks beneath it to lift the drum off the wood floor, packing dirt along the corners to catch sparks. That night, after the girls were asleep, he lit it for the first time. The flame caught slow, then fast. Wood scraps crackled inside. He watched smoke twist up through the makeshift chimney and vanish into the rafters. For a moment, it worked. Then the room filled with smoke. His eyes burned. The girls coughed in their sleep. He doused the flame with a blanket and sat beside the cold barrel until dawn. Eyes wide, chest tight, but not from shame, from calculation. The next time, he told himself, the draw will be better. The next time, the warmth will stay and the smoke will leave. It had to. The second attempt came 2 days later, after the worst frost of the season. Frost that bit through threadbare socks and made the bed sheets stiff as slate. The girls curled under 2 blankets, huddled together like sparrows in a barn loft. Willard sat cross-legged by the drum with a tin of matches and 3 fingers wrapped in gauze from the last burn. He'd modified the chimney, angled it sharper, added a flap of tin to act as a damper, stuffed the barrel's base with broken brick for heat retention, and dug a trench beneath the door for airflow. He even found some old stove polish at the dump and rubbed it across the worst of the rust, like a mortician dressing a corpse. This time, when the fire caught, the smoke hesitated, wavered, then pulled toward the pipe like it finally understood what was being asked of it. It worked. Not perfectly, but it worked. The room warmed slowly. Willard held out his palm to the barrel and felt something close to hope radiating off metal. The girls stirred. Ruthie whispered, "Daddy, it's warm," like she didn't quite trust it. He smiled without showing teeth. "Stay bundled, just in case." Fuel became the next problem. There was no coal. He hadn't seen a stick of it in weeks. So Willard scavenged. He walked 3 miles to the dump outside town and filled a sack with wood scraps, torn upholstery, and busted chair legs. He found a half-burned copy of David Copperfield, its spine cracked, the pages yellowed. He fed it to the barrel like a prayer. Every evening became ritual. Sort the scraps, layer the burn, light the match, monitor the draw, clean the ash. Sleep in shifts so the fire never died. Ruthie learned how to stir the embers without smothering them. Clara, the middle one, figured out how to roll up their quilt to seal the floor gap when wind howled. Even little Annie, barely 4, took to pressing their mittens to the warm barrel sides like she was drawing heat into her bones. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. The cold came harder by mid-November. The wind began to scream through the plains like it was hunting something. A boy from 3 houses down froze to death walking to the store for flour. The paper called it a tragedy. Willard called it inevitable. His fingers bled most mornings now, stiff from cold, cracked from work. Still, he didn't stop. He wrapped the barrel in chicken wire to keep sparks in. He built a ring of rocks around it inside the room to catch embers. He even filled old coffee tins with sawdust soaked in bacon grease, a poor man's fire starter. When the nights dropped below 0 and the walls creaked like old bones, that barrel stayed warm, not hot, not even enough to forget where they were, but enough to live. And that, in the winter of '34, was no small thing. The first week of December arrived like a hammer, sudden, merciless, and final. It was the kind of cold that didn't politely knock at the door, but punched straight through the boards and settled into the hollows of your ribs. The kind that made breath come out in small, scared clouds. Willard had known cold before born to it, raised in it, but this was something else. This cold felt intentional, like it had a personal grievance with anyone still alive on the plains. The town doctor shuttered his clinic when the kerosene ran out. 3 more families abandoned their shacks and headed west, chasing rumors of California oranges and steady work. Everyone else stayed, mostly because they couldn't leave. Even if you had a truck, it froze. Even if you had fuel, it thickened into sludge. The world had narrowed to the reach of your own 2 feet and no farther. Inside the Hayes shack, the barrel burned day and night. Willard learned to manage the fire the way a farmer manages rain, never trusting it, always watching. He discovered the heat lasted longer when he fed it small pieces instead of large ones. He discovered tearing cloth into strips made excellent tinder. He discovered the precise angle the chimney needed to stop backdraft during wind gusts. Every discovery shaved an inch off death, but death stayed close. Ruthie's cough deepened. Clara's nose bled some mornings from the dryness. Little Annie refused to sleep unless her head rested against Willard's shoulder, as if afraid he'd disappear while the world slept. Their mother had been gone 2 winters now. Pneumonia took her fast, and Willard sometimes wondered if the girls believed the cold could take him the same way, quietly, between one breath and the next. He worked harder. He scavenged like a man possessed. Broken crates, splintered porch boards, even the shattered remains of a church pew someone had thrown out. Nothing was beneath him, nothing was unworthy of burning. One day he came home with a bundle of wooden laths he'd torn from an abandoned house frame. Ruthie looked at the pile and whispered, "Will it be enough?" "It'll be enough tonight," he said, "and tomorrow we'll worry about tomorrow." The girls sat close to the barrel, knees pressed to their chests. Their dresses were threadbare, patched with scraps of cloth from flour sacks. Clara held her hands out toward the warmth and said, "It's like sitting beside Mama's oven again." Willard swallowed hard. He didn't want them to remember warm kitchens they made the present colder. But he let Clara speak. Children need their memories the way grown men need their tools. Outside, the wind kept howling. It rattled the walls and sifted dust through every tiny crack. It buried the road in drifts and froze the well pump solid. The sky stayed the color of old tin, and daylight had the weak, uncertain glow of a dying lantern. But the barrel glowed steady. Through every storm, every shriek of wind, every long night, it held. Maybe it wasn't beautiful, maybe it wasn't proper, but it was theirs, and it kept breathing heat when nothing else did. That winter broke men, but Willard Hayes refused to break. It happened on a Thursday, though days had begun to smear together like soot on wet paper. The morning started brittle, with frost clinging to the inside of the window like spiderwebs. When Willard struck the match to relight the barrel, the air felt different, too still, too heavy. Even the girls seemed to sense something was coming. By noon, the first sign appeared. The power plant whistled once, twice, then went silent. Folks in town had always said the plant was the last thing holding back total ruin. When it failed, everything else would topple behind it like dominoes. They were right. Lights flickered out. The schoolhouse went dark mid-lesson. The sheriff's station stove sputtered and died. The church bell rope froze to the floorboards and snapped when someone tried to ring it for help. By the time afternoon shadows stretched across the snow, Desolm, Kansas had become a ghost, quiet, frozen, waiting. The Hayes shack, though, was not quiet. The barrel roared, not loud, not wildly, but steady, alive. Willard fed it a careful mix of scrap wood and sawdust bricks he'd packed in old tins. The girls, cold despite their blankets, stayed close. They knew to lift the quilt off the floor just enough to let warm air circulate. They'd grown up in the kind of poverty that teaches you the physics of survival before you learn arithmetic. As the sun dipped low, a knock came at the door. It was faint, more of a weak scrape than a knock. Willard opened it to find Mr. Dillinger from 3 houses over, slumped against the frame. His beard was crusted with ice. His hands were blue. Behind him, in the swirling dusk, stood his wife and their baby wrapped in ragged quilts. "Our stove's out," Dillinger rasped. "Won't light. Can't get it to stay. Please." Willard didn't hesitate. "Come in, all of you." They crowded inside, their breath fogging instantly. The baby's face was pale with cold, his eyelids fluttering. Ruthie rushed to get blankets. Clara spooned warm water into a cup. Annie pressed her tiny hands against the woman's arm, as if her small warmth could somehow transfer. Word travels fast when life hangs by threads. An hour later, the Evans family arrived, 2 little boys shivering, eyes wide and fearful. Then Mrs. Appleton, who had once mocked Willard's heater but now whispered, "I'm sorry, please, I didn't know." Then a widower from the far end of the lane, carrying a burlap sack of scraps he offered as payment. By nightfall, 11 people huddled in the Hayes shack, shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in blankets and coats and whatever hope they had left. Willard sat beside the barrel, feeding it with careful precision. Not too much, not too little. He watched the flames dance behind the mesh and thought of the day he first dragged the barrel home, how the neighbors laughed, how the sheriff shook his head. Now, those same neighbors were alive because of it. Outside, the town lay frozen and silent. Inside, the barrel hummed like a heartbeat. And for the first time all winter, Willard felt warm. By February, the world outside had stopped pretending. It wasn't a winter anymore, it was a siege. Snowdrifts rose higher than fence posts, and the dust storms came in black waves that blotted out the sun at midday. Folks started saying the season had no intention of ending, that maybe the land had finally grown tired of people and meant to scrape them off like old paint. Inside the Hayes shack, life moved in small, deliberate motions. Willard's barrel heater still glowed, but each day required more effort to keep it going. The woodpile had shrunk to a handful of twisted boards and a stack of brittle chair legs. Even the sawdust bricks were dwindling. Every piece of burnable material within walking distance had already been claimed by someone desperate. Still, the heater held. The families who had taken refuge in Willard's shack came and went as they were able, returning home to tend to livestock, to check on their own stoves, to salvage what they could from frozen gardens and abandoned sheds. But on the worst nights, when the sky turned the color of spoiled milk, or when the wind moaned like a dying animal, they came back, all of them, and Willard always opened the door. One night, as March crept in without a hint of thaw, Willard sat sharpening the edge of an old hatchet near the heater when Ruthie spoke softly from her bedroll. "Daddy, are we going to be all right when the wood runs out?" The question didn't frighten him. Not anymore. Children speak the truth because they don't know how to dress it up. Willard set down the hatchet and considered how much truth she needed. "We're all right now," he said, "and tomorrow we'll make it all right again." Ruthie nodded, satisfied. Clara whispered something to her sister about faith being like fire. You can't always see it, but you feel it. Annie reached out and touched the heater with her mittened hand, as if to say thank you in her own quiet language. That night the wind stopped, suddenly and completely, like someone had flipped a switch on the whole plains. Willard stepped outside, breath frozen in midair. The silence felt unnatural, almost holy. The snow around the shack glowed under the cold starlight. Over the distant ridge, a faint pink shimmer hinted at dawn. The next morning, the cold broke. Not fully, not dramatically, but enough that the children noticed. Enough that the door no longer froze shut. Enough that the wind carried the scent of thawing earth. It was the first crack in winter's armor. By mid-March, the roads could be cleared. By late March, A train made it through with sacks of flour and tins of coffee. Townsfolk gathered at the station, thin and trembling, but alive. A reporter from the county paper came knocking 3 days later. He'd heard the Rolls story about the heater that kept half a street alive, about the man who'd built it from junk and stubbornness. Willard let him look at the barrel, let him take a picture, though he stood off to the side, uncomfortable with the idea of credit. "It ain't about me," he muttered. "Maybe not," the reporter said, "but it's because of you." When the article came out, it called Willard Hayes, a modest mechanic whose homemade stove saved 11 lives in the winter of '34. Folks started tipping their hats when he passed, offering him scraps of lumber, old tools, handshakes warmed by gratitude. Willard accepted them, but without pride. Pride had burned away somewhere in the long nights near the barrel. Spring was slow that year, shy, uncertain, but it came. Grass pushed through the thawing soil. Birds returned to the eaves. The days lengthened, and the barrel went cold more often than it burned. Willard didn't dismantle it. He kept it in the corner, a guardian at rest. It had been a foolish idea, they said, useless, dangerous, not worth the trouble. But in the long winter, when breath turned brittle and hope turned thin, that barrel had glowed like a stubborn heart refusing to stop. And that was enough.